For generations, families living deep within the United States existed on society's edge, maintaining a legacy of consanguinity that damaged and destroyed their own bloodlines. Instances of incest and their genetic fallout were never fully brought to light, instead remaining hidden in the shadows of history, far from public scrutiny. This documentary reveals the obscure secrets of families whose narratives were distorted and suppressed over time. We will, in this documentary, explore the genuine cases of lineages decimated by generations of relative marriages, resulting in physical deformities, diseases, and a lasting stigma that resonates even today. What these families endured, and the impact their decisions had on subsequent generations, shows more than just the story of a forbidden act. It unveils the consequences of guarded secrets and how they altered the destiny of many. The camera focuses on old photographs, showing us visions of isolated hamlets and faces that bear the scars of the past, as we journey to the Appalachian region, where the Kellogg family's history began, ignored and hidden from public view for many years. Check now if you are already subscribed to this channel so you don't miss more rare and impactful stories that have been carefully concealed from the public eye. The history of the Kellogg family began in a remote Appalachian region, where the outside world seemed distant and opportunities for marriage beyond the community were virtually non-existent. The Kellogg family, a devastating cycle. This was a period when both social and geographical limitations fostered a closed cycle, with marriages between relatives often being the sole viable options. What started as a seemingly common and innocent custom at the time would soon become a devastating legacy of consanguinity that would forever mark the generations to follow. Early in the 19th century, in an isolated area of West Virginia, members of the Kellogg family were recognized for their modest existence, centered on the basic need for survival. The community, situated in the Appalachian Mountains, consisted of only a few families who knew each other intimately and relied on one another for assistance. Access to other cities or villages was not easy, and the notion of marrying outside the community was practically unthinkable. According to local documentation, the first marriage within the Kellogg family itself happened around 1820, when Ezekiel Kellogg, a young relative, wed his cousin, Sarah Kellogg, who, like him, hailed from the same small community. Marriage was seen as a practical answer. Due to the isolation, options outside the community were minimal, and preserving the family lineage within the unit was considered normal. Over the years, this sort of union between cousins was repeated, cementing the practice within the family itself. The first act of family incest was driven by a mix of factors: isolation, a shortage of new people in the region, and a specific perspective on maintaining the family lineage. It was not a case of coercion, but a decision shared among relatives who viewed this as a means to solidify family bonds and ensure the continuation of their land and family business. These choices were made for economic and social convenience, without any true awareness of the genetic implications. James Kellogg, the first child born of Ezekiel and Sarah's union, arrived in 1821. James displayed physical traits that immediately caused alarm in the community. He suffered from facial deformities, motor difficulties, and a delay in cognitive development, making proper communication impossible. The lack of understanding regarding genetics then meant these problems were blamed on unknown factors, and the community did not link these difficulties to the widespread practice of marriage among close relatives. The physical effects of cousin marriages gradually became unmistakable. Children and grandchildren of the first couples began to experience similar health issues, such as more severe facial deformities, difficulty with mobility, profound cognitive disabilities, and even heart disease. Yet, the tradition of marriage between family members persisted, mainly because of the absence of external alternatives and the stigma associated with deviating from the community norm. In the ensuing years, marriages within the family continued. In 1850, John Kellogg, Ezekiel's nephew and James's son, married his first cousin, Mary Kellogg. This marriage, like those before it, was seen as acceptable, even necessary, by the community. The couple had several children, many of whom were born with the same health issues observed in previous generations, including microcephaly, difficulties with movement, and facial anomalies. The physical results of such unions were becoming increasingly apparent, but the practice remained regarded as a necessity within the small community. The emotional repercussions were also severe. Many family members began to live on the fringes of society, unable to connect with others and frequently succumbing to isolation. the shame and stigma surrounding malformations and cognitive deficiency were evident. However, these feelings of guilt and shame were frequently suppressed by the insistence on keeping the family strong and united in line with community traditions. The cycle of marriage between close relatives and cousins in the Kellogg family endured over the decades. In 1880, a new generation of descendants married within the same lineage, and again, the consequences were devastating. William Kellogg, son of John and Mary, married his aunt, Eliza Kellogg, leading to the birth of a new generation of individuals with severe physical and mental disabilities. Within the family, these weddings were no longer questioned. For the Kelloggs, the practice was common and even anticipated. Knowledge about the risks of consanguinity and genetics was non-existent, and for many, health issues were attributed to simple bad luck. However, as deformities and diseases increased, the family began to be viewed with greater distance by neighboring communities. Isolation intensified, and the lack of social and medical support led to a worsening of the physical and emotional state of family members. The Kellogg family story was treated as a hidden and isolated case for many years. It was only in the early 20th century, with the emergence of new genetic research, that the true extent of consanguinity's consequences began to be understood. A few surviving family members sought assistance outside the community, revealing the continuous practice of marriages between relatives in 1920. Upon studying the family records, genetics experts discovered that the observed physical and mental problems were the direct result of the repeated consanguineous marriages. Over time, the Kellogg family's history was gradually published in scientific journals and later became a subject in genetic and consanguinity studies. Nevertheless, the local community and many still living family members continued to live under the burden of shame, often choosing to ignore the truth about their lineage. The Kellogg family legacy offers a profound lesson about the consequences of social isolation and ignorance. The cycle of family consanguinity not only led to physical deformities but also created a legacy of shame and social isolation that lasted for generations. The stigma associated with these practices caused many to hide their history, not out of malice, but from a necessity to protect their dignity and identity. As we begin to comprehend the consequences of consanguinity, a reflection on our own social norms becomes unavoidable. What stories are being concealed from us in the present day? How many families are living in secret with similar untold stories? What does this reveal about human nature and our tendency to safeguard what is simplest to ignore? If you also feel the weight of this story, comment below now. Not all families should be forgotten. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this that must be heard and understood. The Whitaker family, isolation and ignorance. The history of the Whitaker family emerged from the shadows in a small Western Virginia town, where isolation and generations of consanguinity were intertwined, bringing to light the devastating impacts of a lack of genetic knowledge. For years, the secret was kept, with family members existing on the outskirts of society, bearing a stigma they should never have had to carry. What started with marriages between close cousins and the continuation of ancestral customs would result in extreme consequences, leaving an indelible mark on subsequent generations. The following account is not merely about the Whitaker family, but about how ignorance and isolation can transform lives and prolong suffering over multiple generations. The Whitaker family's history can be traced back to the 1800s, when the first generations of this lineage settled in a difficult-to-access, isolated region of Western Virginia. Family members were mostly farmers who lived in a small, close-knit community with limited social interactions. The distance from urban centers and the lack of access to formal education made marriages between relatives the only practical option for maintaining properties and preserving the family name. The first documented case of family incest occurred in the late 1800s when Edward Whitaker, a young family member, married his first cousin, Margaret Whitaker. The union was deemed acceptable within the community as both were children of close branches of the same family tree, and marriage between cousins was not rare in isolated families with small populations and limited options for new alliances. Though the choice to marry was voluntary, there was no comprehensive understanding of the genetic ramifications it could cause. Edward and Margaret, like many other community members, were unaware of the risks that consanguinity would entail. For them, marriage was a matter of tradition and convenience, not scientific knowledge. At that time, studies on the risks of incest and its consequences for the health of descendants were not widely available. The couple's first child, Ray Whitaker, was born in 1890. He suffered from severe microcephaly, a rare condition marked by the abnormal development of the brain, which caused serious cognitive deficiencies. Furthermore, Ray faced significant motor difficulties, exhibiting a deep mental delay and being unable to walk without assistance. These symptoms were not immediately attributed to consanguinity. However, over time, it became clear that the repeated marriages between close relatives and cousins had given rise to severe genetic problems. Ray was just the initial descendant of the Whitaker family to face the consequences of generations of consanguinity. His mental and physical condition not only impacted his quality of life but also stigmatized him before society, compelling the family to live in even deeper isolation. The struggles Ray encountered shaped the lives of other relatives who went on to repeat the same patterns and endure the same emotional and physical consequences. The stigma and shame associated with Ray's condition were so profound that for many years the family was avoided by other residents of the region who did not grasp the causes of the health problems affecting the Whitaker lineage. This stigma was perpetuated for generations, leading to the family becoming increasingly isolated from society, unable to establish relationships with other community members. It wasn't until 2004 that the Whitaker family's story was revealed to the general public, when filmmaker Mark Laita, known for documenting the stories of marginalized people, visited the family to film their reality. Laita created a documentary that exposed the Whitakers' living conditions, revealing to the world the devastating effects of consanguinity in an isolated lineage. Laita's documentary, Soft White Underbelly, not only exposed the family's harsh reality but also brought to light the genetic issues that afflicted the Whitakers. The film served as a turning point for the public's understanding of consanguinity's effects, clearly demonstrating how decisions made in past generations continue to impact the mental and physical health of future ones. The documentary's repercussion was massive, sparking a wave of discussion about the genetic risks of consanguinity, particularly in isolated communities. While many watched the documentary with both shock and compassion, the story also raised vital questions about the lack of awareness and education regarding genetic effects in small rural United States communities. The Whitaker family case was a landmark in the debate over consanguinity and its health consequences. Mark Laita's documentary not only exposed the social and genetic problems the family faced but also questioned how social isolation and a lack of genetic information can lead to practices that, without scientific understanding, are devastating to the health of subsequent generations. The case emphasized the need for genetic education and public policies to prevent consanguinity practices in isolated communities where access to information is limited. The discussion about consanguinity's social impact also broadened, with experts asserting that providing educational resources and awareness for these populations is essential so they can make informed decisions about their relationships. Furthermore, the emotional impact of the story was deep, not just for the Whitaker family members but for the entire community that viewed the documentary. The shame, isolation, and lack of psychological support for those involved became a recurring theme in the discussions following the film's screening. One of Laita's documentary's most surprising revelations was the discovery that several Whitaker family members had attempted to distance themselves from the lineage and pursue new paths, but due to a lack of opportunities and isolation, they ultimately returned to the cycle of consanguinity. Many of the family's most recent descendants were aware of their history's implications and sought help. However, the genetic consequences were so profound that, in many cases, assistance was not enough. The Whitaker family story leads us to a profound reflection on how the choices made by one generation can affect those to come, especially when the necessary resources and knowledge to understand those choices are not available. The repetition of incest in the family was not an act of force or malice, but a practice that arose from ignorance and necessity, and its consequences were devastating. The shame, the stigma, and the physical and emotional consequences continue to haunt younger generations who carry the burden of a legacy they did not choose. In the end, the Whitaker family history serves as a warning about the dangers of a lack of education on public health and genetics, and of isolation. It teaches us that, as a society, we have a responsibility to inform and educate communities to prevent practices like consanguinity from resulting in such deep tragedies. If you also feel the weight of this story, comment now. What is the result when love between relatives becomes fatal? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this that need to be understood. The stigma and social rejection. The case of the Whitaker family is one of the most tragic illustrations of consanguinity and how it can profoundly impact the physical, mental, and emotional health of a lineage. The story, brought to light by Laita, not only exposed the consequences of consanguinity but also spurred a reflection on the impact of social isolation and the lack of genetic education in the most remote communities. By learning from these stories, we can better comprehend the challenges faced by many communities and work to prevent these tragedies from recurring. The social rejection of families affected by consanguinity was a matter of institutional marginalization as well as stigma. For a long time, the Whitaker family was avoided by neighbors and even members of other known families. The reason was obvious: genetic malformations and cognitive difficulties were seen as a curse, something the community preferred to ignore or refuse to accept. In a testimonial from a former neighbor, Martha Jennings, she revealed how the community's perception of the Whitaker family was consistently negative. "I recall when we were kids and heard stories about the Whitaker family. Everyone spoke in whispers about what was happening in that house. No one wanted to approach. No one wanted to interact. People talked about how disfigured the children there were and how they weren't normal. We couldn't let someone like that into our home. Having any kind of contact with them felt almost like a punishment." This type of social marginalization left a deep scar on the psyche of the Whitaker family members, as they were rejected by the health and education systems, as well as by people. They lived on the periphery, struggling to obtain appropriate medical care, and their education was neglected, as many of the family members were deemed unable to attend conventional schools due to their cognitive limitations. The lack of social support caused them to live in progressive isolation, which only exacerbated the situation for everyone involved. Consanguineous families like the Whitakers learned to survive in isolation. Without the support of the outside world and with severely limited resources, the daily life of these families was a constant fight to maintain their survival. There was no access to public health information, education, or even psychological support, which made it even harder to live with a good quality of life. In the Whitakers' case, in addition to the psychological and physical difficulty, there was also the challenge of maintaining dignity in a society that viewed them as anomalies. For many family members, their lives were spent attempting to live like others, but always carrying the burden of a stigma that followed them everywhere. This created a profound feeling of inadequacy and a lack of belonging, sentiments shared by many in the lineage. Laita's documentary offered a unique window into their lives, allowing the world to understand the depth of the social isolation experienced by the Whitaker family. Laita, in an interview, commented on the experience of filming the family. "What was most striking to me was how they were in complete confinement, but at the same time, they communicated with each other in a very intimate way. There was a resilience in how they protected themselves, but also an immense fragility in how they confronted the outside world. Documenting this reality was a great privilege, but also a great responsibility." The deepest reflection prompted by this case is the extent to which ignorance and stigma can determine the fate of a family or a person. What happened to the Whitaker family raises crucial questions about how society treats the excluded and how we can change our approach to ensure more people do not endure this type of suffering.